I'd definitely like to see that, please.
Sure.
Thanks, Phil. Perhaps that can be circulated to everybody, because I think we'd all be interested to have a look at it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. If we could just, interested in the, it was one of the first slides where you mentioned the 83% of houses built in Plymouth built on previously developed sites. You know, that sounds a really good figure, because I think that was always a key plank of the plan. But just to clarify, is that 83% in Plymouth, or is that 83% of the houses across the plan area? You know, does it include South Hams and West Devon as well? There's a bit of a, yeah, I'd just like clarification on that one, please. Thank you.
Ed, could you clarify that for Peter?
Yeah, so that figure is just the Plymouth Authority area, because we know that's been a particular interest of councillors in the past. So we do have the figure for each authority area. If that's something that people would like, we can send that out, and it's part of the report as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, but still, I mean, 83%, well, I guess, you know, obviously Plymouth's a pretty urban area, but 83% is still, you know, reasonably impressive, I think. Okay, thank you.
Sue Dan.
Hi, thank you. You've partly answered my question. It was about the capturing the carbon savings, especially from that last slide. I suppose so following up to the council who just asked the question, I'd like to see how that breaks down, simply because I think we've been in different transport modes for the last 2 years with COVID. And I know certainly in Plymouth, we had a big drop in road transport, but it seems to have gone back up again. So it would be interesting to see how that works, especially when we've all got sustainable transport plans, to see if it's how it's shown its way through. So yes, so it's a follow-on question really, or statement. Thank you.
Okay, don't forget that this only takes us up to the end of 2021, so we're working somewhat in arrears, and we won't have the answer to that sort of question till next year, when we shall again be a year in arrears. So, but I'm afraid that's the way that monitoring works.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But it would be interesting to see what the correlation is, because I mean, we've been working on transforming cities now for over 5 years. So it would be interesting to see if there is already an impact on some of the strategies that we've been putting into place.
Yeah, we understand that. Yes. Thanks. Officers, do you want to
Councillor Pearce, could I just come in there? Because
yes,
I think,
yes, please.
I think the Bayes data, actually the latest data is 2019. So it's even further in arrears. So we're not actually going to see probably the impact of even 21, 22 for quite a number of years, which isn't terribly helpful. But it's the sort of best we've got in terms of working to it. But yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, Jackie, morning, Jackie.
Yeah, good morning. I just wanted to ask Jo, she mentioned that there'd been a loss of affordable housing of a couple of hundred and said she'd refer to it. I don't know if I missed what she said, but could you just tell us about the loss of affordable housing that was referred to?
Yeah, there's been 253 losses this year in 2021. So demolitions due to the sites at North Prospect. So that's where there's been considerable losses this year. At North Prospect, and I think which has accounted for the sort of slight shortfall in affordable housing at the plan as a whole. But those are expected to be built over the next 5 years. So there's a time lag between when they're knocked down and then when they're built again. So that's the important point about the demolitions. So
they will be replaced?
Absolutely. In fact, there's going to be more. I think there's 258 homes due to be built over the next 5 years. So yeah, it's all a regeneration scheme. I don't know whether Patrick would like to come in.
If I may, please, Jo and Judy. Yeah, certainly in terms of the regeneration of certain quarters of Plymouth, it does require the demolition of existing property. So if we take North Prospect, a long-standing regeneration project nearing completion, almost the entire estate has been knocked down and rebuilt. And that's what we're going to go through in Barton. So it unfortunately does have an impact on the figures and something we're going to have to live with for the next few years in relation to Barton's demolition programme. But certainly the policy objective is to re-provide that affordable housing, new affordable housing, to replace it and hopefully increase the amount that's being provided. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, and this was already happening last year, so it's something we're getting used to seeing now in the monitoring report. But Plymouth's regeneration is kind of skewing the figures, but it's a good news story in the end, isn't it, Patrick? So
absolutely, and I suppose we should have mentioned Devonport. You know, for
Yes.
those members, particularly from outside Plymouth, if you come to Devonport, it's a totally different community than that which existed 10 years ago. So it'd be well worth, if ever you're in Plymouth and not a Plymouth member, to actually drive around Devonport, North Prospect and Barton and see the transformation that's taken place. Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Patrick. Lynn.
Oh, thank you very much. That was a very good presentation. My question again was about affordable houses or affordability of houses, because although we've been told that we've over-delivered, in West Devon we're told we still have a housing crisis, that there are so many people on waiting lists that can't get houses that they can actually afford. And after all, everything's affordable for somebody. So I really want us to be thinking in terms of social housing, or housing that's affordable to rent or to buy with assistance, rather than just this blanket term affordable housing, because it doesn't really seem to be solving the problem. And also, being in Dartmoor National Park, they have a affordable housing policy that everything being built needs to be 50% affordable. So do you think 30% is a bit of a low target for us, considering the issues that we do have with people, local people, not being able to get local housing? Thank you.
Shall I take that one, Judy? In the first
Please do, Jo. Yes, please do.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Daniel. Yeah, we totally recognise that. I think both West Devon and South Hams have declared a housing crisis and are investigating and lobbying the government on a whole realm of issues to make, attempt to make the homes more affordable, and looking at sort of second homes and what can be done there. We will be, in terms of moving forward, any review of the joint local plan will be looking at collecting up-to-date evidence to understand what the affordability challenges are and what the needs might be. So this current joint local plan was built on evidence from around 2017-18. The world has changed, and we any update will need to take account of new evidence, and as part of that we might want to be looking and testing different percentages of affordable, whether 30% is the right figure now in the light of the emergencies that exist and the needs that exist. But what we'll have to do is test that very clearly in terms of viability and what the impact might be. I know certainly there's been a focus on sort of social rented, and we've been resisting other types of affordable to really try and get the 60-40 split that is in the SPD and sort of enshrined in that approach. And I think, the figures do show that in terms of permissions, we are getting around the 60-40 split for social rented. But we know, our affordable housing and housing delivery teams are really keen on that and are working very, very hard to secure that where they can and where it's viable. So I hope that sort of gives you a bit of reassurance that we will be looking at that next time round.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Judy, I couldn't just come in on that point, because there's a wider political point, Lynn, on this, that there is a disconnect in language between that we deliver through planning policy and what we see on the ground of many of our residents seeking to procure accommodation that's affordable. And I think this disconnect will continue in terms of the language. But, as Joe's quite ably said, in terms of the planning perspective, which we're here today, we're obviously trying to fulfil the policy objectives, and those will be reviewed. But there is, in terms of our colleagues who are involved in homelessness and, ensuring that there's suitable supply of accommodation for all sectors of the local community, there are challenges there, and clearly the government need to continue to address that nationally in the way that they help homelessness and particularly young families starting off in their own accommodation. So I don't think the language that we have to comply with from a policy perspective is particularly helpful, because it's more academic than the needs we have on the streets. But there's certainly in parallel activity that needs to take place to ensure that on the ground there is sufficient housing for those that we need to house. And it is difficult, particularly for rural communities where the number of rented units are limited and the opportunities for further rented units are equally difficult compared to a city setting. But it's a challenge that we need to continue to rise to try and ensure that, you know, particularly the young have housing for the future.
Yeah. OK, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. And if I could just jump in there too, I think as long as the NPPF is using the definition affordable housing, we're going to be constrained to use it in planning policy terms as well. And as Patrick says, it really isn't helpful. Now, I seem to recall that one Judge Boggis first used this term in about 1994. And there used to be a reference to it on the internet, which I've just been looking for, but it's not there anymore. So I don't know what's happened to it. I think he's retreated pretty fast, realising that what he said no longer applies. But also, I think we've got to recall that just building new houses is not going to be a response to the affordable housing problem. There's a lot more we can do besides. And I think now that certainly in West Devon and in South Hams, we've got resolutions in council to do something about it. We should be looking at other means of trying to resolve the problem rather than just building new houses. But new houses always help, but it takes a long time to deliver them. OK.
Yes.
OK, so I'll move on to the next one. It's Rose Rowe. Rose?
Thank you. Yes, good morning. Thank you. Going back to what Patrick said about Barton and the redevelopment there, I really welcome that, because when I was on the board of Tor Homes, which is quite a long time ago now, we actually did visit that area and did some work with some of the residents there, and it did need rehousing and a new scheme there. And I really welcome the fact that not only are you're demolishing 253 homes, but you will get 258. So there will be a gain of 5 homes there, which will help with the housing needs. It's an ongoing problem, and the same in quite a few of the deprived areas of Plymouth. We all have deprived areas in our own areas in South Devon and indeed in West Devon as well. But I think this is a good way going forward, and I shall make it my business to go down to Devonport and have a look around there. Maybe when the weather gets a bit better in the summer and we go out on a jolly from our end of the ward. I'm on the edge of Tor Bay, and I look forward to going down to Plymouth and perhaps might even be able to meet up with you. Thank you.
Well done,
Thanks,
Rose.
Rose. OK, Chris Edmonds, you're next. Morning, Chris.
Good morning, Judy. Thank you. Well, look, Councillor Tony Leach at Oakhampton has asked me to raise 3 questions on his behalf. He's unable to join the meeting due to technology issues. His first question is regarding sustainable villages listed in the JLP. Tony would like to know who sets the criteria for sustainability, and could this be reviewed? Shall we take them one at a time?
Yes, is that one for Phil to answer?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I've discussed this with Councillor Leach a while ago. Actually, it was probably too long ago to kind of refresh his memory with relation to this meeting. Yeah, there was a sustainable villages assessment matrix that was submitted as part of the joint local plan evidence base. It involved a number of categories that we tested with rural communities and members, went through a couple of rounds of public consultation. So the inspectors were more than happy with its robustness and the way that informed the naming of the villages that went forward as sustainable settlements within the JLP. And that will, of course, be assessed again when we come to joint local plan review, just to make sure that we kind of are still identifying those correctly and recognise what they contribute to not just their own villages, but obviously the surrounding rural hinterlands as well.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Can I?
Yeah, you got another one, Chris. Yeah,
I'm afraid I've got another 2. Tony's second question is regarding settlement boundaries, and these have been removed for villages that do not have a neighbourhood plan. Tony thinks he's seen something from the planning inspectorate that says existing settlement boundaries can be reintroduced via a supplementary planning document. Would that be the case?
Phil, I think this is you again, isn't it?
that would potentially be a mechanism, but it would be much lower in weight in terms of whether or not it was contained within a development plan document, a local plan, for example. The JLP does leave quite clear route for people to follow in terms of identifying settlement boundaries through neighbourhood plans. That would certainly be the route that I would advocate in the short term. And I know a number of the members that are on the call at the moment have been working with their local neighbourhood plan groups to do just that. Whether or not that is a policy approach that we consider next time round as part of a kind of comprehensive review of the policies we use, that will certainly be a discussion that we're open to have.
Okay, thank you. Just finally, if I may, Judy, and his final question was around exception sites. And Tony's concerned, I think, that when these sites come forward, the local ward members is not consulted. So his question is really, can ward members be consulted at an early stage of the exception site process?
Can I just say that is starting to go into the realm of sort of development management and the process of that, rather than sort of the policy approach. I mean, it's certainly something that we can talk to Pat about as part of that, and perhaps we can pick it up, Councillor, at the member session on the 24th of March that I think everyone's been invited to, rather than actually dealing with it through the sort of AMR. Unless, Judy, you want me to go any further?
No, I think you're right, Joe, that does slide into DM. So, yes. Chris, could you take that back? But thanks for asking the question.
I will certainly feed that back to Tony. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Nikki, good morning. It's your turn next. I think you're on mute, so unmute yourself. Oh, no? Yes? Has Nikki dropped out? I'm not sure where she is. Well,
I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, you are there. Sorry. Yes, carry on. Yeah.
New Zealand's been looking at a way of building its way out of its housing crisis using something like Hoff homes. It was something like £100 million investment to build a factory that you could create these houses, and then the unit cost is 40 or 50% below the cost of building houses in the way we normally do. And of course, they are very thermally insulated and so on. Just wonder whether we could perhaps talk to central government about funding, setting up a factory to build that kind of house. Just a thought.
Okay, who wants to answer this from the officers? Any of you?
What I will say, Judy, is I know that Chris has done already quite a bit of work with. It's called Modern Methods of Construction, MMC. There are a number of firms, not just in the UK, but within the Southwest already, that we're engaging in discussions with. So that's definitely an agenda that we will seek to push and pursue, Nikki, definitely.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. It's a bit on the lines we've already been talking about, affordable homes. There's windfall sites that come up in the area that would be mostly affordable, and they get sat on because of sustainability or lack of it, even down to when you've got a bus route going by. I'm a bit disappointed, really, that, and always have been with our joint local plan. To my mind, as a rural person, it is very urban based, and there's a lot of villages that could have done with some more houses on to make them sustainable, and I'll carry on saying that. And there are sites that come up, local farmers are prepared to give some land to put houses on, and it's not happening. And those are the sort of places that the local young families would take up and live in. And we need to address that sooner rather than later, and I will continue to keep on batting that one in until we do something about it.
Right, Joe, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Voss. I think we understand there is some willingness or wish for us to be looking at sort of what constitutes rural sustainability. I mean, this was raised last year at the AGM, and we certainly recognising that, and we're taking forward a bit of evidence gathering at the moment to try and understand how the rural area functions and what would make it sustainable in its widest sense, and whether that would be looking at different kinds of policies or slightly more nuanced policies about, you know, the function and the needs of the rural area to meet the sort of infrastructure requirements to support the schools and those kind of things. So we're very, very well aware that you want us to look at that, and certainly it is something we are committed to in terms of any kind of review and sort of policy mechanism going forward. And we'll be involved, you know, once the review kicks off in due course, as and when it does, once we know what the government are doing in terms of the planning reforms, we will be starting to work with yourselves and other rural communities, you know, to look at different options going forward. So, you know, I think you can be reassured that we are taking this seriously, but we can't change the plan as it is. It's up to date, it's got weight, and we need to use it in its current form. I would also say that I think the spatial strategy in the local plan is actually a really robust strategy of locating the majority of houses to the most sustainable and accessible locations. And that was very, very well in line with national government policy. So, you know, we wouldn't be wanting to change that as a general strategy of the plan. Even if we are going to look at rural areas in a slightly different way and a bit more nuanced, I think the national policy guidance and policy framework does mean we have to still consider and make sure that growth goes to the most accessible and sustainable locations. I don't know whether anyone else has anything to add to that.
Judy,
Patrick, do you want to jump in there? Yes.
Yeah, I just want. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to say from a councillor perspective, and having been involved in the development of the joint local plan for a number of years, it's fair to say that the whole aspiration was to preserve the countryside surrounding Plymouth and to effectively concentrate development on Plymouth and the surrounding areas. And this is a long-standing aspiration. You know, I was involved in the old Devon structure plan when two towns were being considered at the end of the 1990s. And that's what we've seen, the delivery of Sherford and the delivery of the new town on the edge of Exeter. And that was a long-standing political policy objective of the councillors of the day. Now, you're absolutely right. You know, things have moved on. And I've got to say, personally, I couldn't be supporting another new town in South Devon for the future housing needs of Plymouth, West Devon and South Hams areas. And so this is an issue that councillors will need to address collectively as we move to review the joint local plan, which will be probably in a couple of years' time, taking into account whatever the government decides to do around planning policy legislation. So I think it is recognised by those of us involved in the joint local plan. The current local plan does implement what councillors wanted when we were developing this in the run-up to 2018 when the joint local plan was adopted. But, you know, life does move on. And as we move through the 2020s, we need to recognise the needs of the local community. And you're absolutely right. There are small communities in the rural parts of South Hams and West Devon where no development isn't sustainable for that small hamlet or that small community. And we will need to address that moving forward. But we are, as Joe said, here with a current policy position that we do need to continue to deliver for our own sakes, but evolve that policy in due course through the review. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks. I think
can I come back on that just briefly, Judy? Yeah, I understand where you're all coming from, but we have to have a nice countryside and protect it and all that, but it also has to thrive as well. Yeah. And people have to be able to live and work in there. And I think it's just a trick we missed at the time. I don't want to be critical, but I do think that we need to, you know, as soon as we can to address that. And I'm glad there's some that you understand that. Thanks.
Richard, I think you've got a good point there, but I think it's the and work which is the most urgent bit at the moment. And there are the national policy constraints on the Aonb and the national parks. Now that only leaves a strip, particularly of South Hams in the middle, that you can really sort of go for properly. But it is something we very much got in mind because we realised that perhaps we missed a trick, but there are always exception sites, but the difficulty has been delivering those exception sites as ever. But we are looking at it, okay? Jonathan, you're next.
Thank you, Judy. I've been listening to the debate, and I would just like to fully support Councillor Foss on his comments. In our being parochial, which I apologise being an executive member, being parochial for our town and villages, we've just had a huge development at the top of Dartmouth, 450 odd houses, and it's been it's a good development, it's high quality design, etc., but it's not actually achieving what we really need, and we need more social rented properties in towns like ours. Now, the issue we have got, obviously, in the coastal region of the South Hams is second homes and holiday lets. And I have got probably the smallest secondary through school in Devon. We've just got about
Jonathan, can you speed up because we're getting to the end of our time?
Okay, well, I'm really concerned that we're not providing the houses which we really need in the small rural communities. I'm sorry, Judy, I'm just going to go on one more second. It is a real concern because in my own village in Kingsware, because of second homes, holiday lets, etc., the local plan has made our village unsustainable, or supposedly unsustainable. We've got bus routes, we've got trains, we've got ferries, we've got a school. We've got a school that is one of two that is under threat of closure. Now, my school has fallen from a range pupil of over 50 down to just under 30. And unless we can provide affordable housing and social rented houses in such communities, our communities are slowly, well, they're not slowly now, they're fast dying. And I think we've really got to, in the new local plan, when we get there, we've really got to address this seriously because it's causing, it's killing our local communities, it's killing our small villages, it's killing our hamlets because the only people who can afford to live there are very wealthy, retired, etc. And our communities are dying because of it. So, sorry.
Yeah, I think we all realise this. Now, we've come to a bit of a crisis point because I've got three more people who want to speak. I've got Vibo, Joseph, Pat Patel and Jackie. What I'm going to suggest is that we've come to 11:45. So we're going to move on. If there's any time at the end, you can ask your questions. But if not, please submit them in writing and you will get a response that will be circulated as part of the notes from this meeting, if that's all right with you. Sorry about that, but we did say that we were going to move on at 11:45. So who is going to do the next part of the presentation? Joe, I think it's you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I thought I saw the other Joe sharing the slides, although they seem to have disappeared.
Yes, I'm just trying to put them up. Where's it gone?
So I'll just introduce this. So thanks to all who have helped develop this in a really quick period of time. We have been asked by members to produce a interim climate emergency planning policy and guidance document for consultation. We're asking the board to endorse the document for the consultation, which will be a 6-week public consultation. And what we're going to hopefully do, if we can get the slides up, is take you through all the measures we're proposing and then making sure there's time for questions. So whizzing through this, Phil and I are going to do a bit of a double act. Phil's been very intimately involved with this, together with Chris Brooke and Jonathan Bell as well, and numerous other officers throughout the councils. And I say that in plural because we've had lots of conversation with lots of people, but it still probably needs more. So next slide, please, Joe. OK, so you as members of the board and many of your other members wanted us to provide a very strong and urgent response to the climate and biodiversity emergencies and wanted us to go further than the current plan policies. And that plan policy is DEV 32, for those of you that may or may not be familiar. Since the plan has been adopted a couple of years ago, there has been the national climate emergency and our local declarations have increased in significance enormously. and they are all now a significant material consideration in the planning process. So as in a response to that and the importance of the issue, we are proposing a climate emergency planning policy and guidance consultation document, which we will consult on and that will have significant weight in the decision-making process. Can we have the next slide, please, Joe? The reason we're doing this is, as I said, climate emergency and climate change is a material consideration. It's had increased significance over the last year, and it's being given numerous amounts of weight and increasing weight over the period. National policy and framework and plans and the government are taking it very, very seriously, as you can see in all these kind of things. We're also being asked and supported in this in terms of the Secretary of State recognising that it is a material consideration, and even our own appeal decision in Dartmouth had the inspector recognised the need for urgent action and the folly of building homes that would need retrofitting. So there's numerous evidence and reasons why we should be taking this seriously, and that's set out in the documents which you may or may have not read yet, but we hope you will, and we hope you'll get involved with. The Environment Act has also set out a raft of proposals and given it more weight, and we are very pleased that the government are actually introducing numerous things in the Future Homes and the Future Building Standard, which are going to be brought into building regulations from June 2022. So in large effect, we are twin tracking those, but we also want to go much further. So if we could have the next slide, please, Joe. What the document does is explains why we need it and what it is and how it relates particularly to the Joint Local Plan and its policies and the SPD and how we will apply it. We've set out a series of fact sheets with the different mitigation and adaptation requirements on it, but for the different development types, and setting out the consultation questions on each element. So we're interested both in, is it generally going far enough or is it going too far? But also on the specific measures, can you give us more information about them? Is it going to work? Is there a better way of doing it? What more could we be doing? It's supported by a sustainability and equalities impact assessment, and we ultimately want to develop it into a digital web-based tool which will signpost back to the specific policy requirements in the Joint Local Plan, but also where existing tools exist in the SPD, Supplementary Planning Document, but also nationally, there's a raft of information that's available. Phil, I'm going to hand over to you while I have a glass of water, and you can take us through sort of the next slides and perhaps start off with how it's working.
Yep, thanks, Joe. So the document's broken down into two key categories, which is mitigation measures and adaptation measures. This is a kind of recognised way of kind of breaking down and understanding our response to the challenge of climate change. We've got some key requirements that we're going to take you through with regard to mitigation. There's slightly fewer in terms of adaptation, although we are thinking about an additional new tool to try and wrap up all of the different adaptation measures that we're looking to achieve. So I think the best thing to do, Joe, would be to go on to the next slide, please, and we'll start going through the summary table of how we're seeking to address the different requirements. The policies that are numbered M1 to M11 are the mitigation measures that we're looking to achieve, and the adaptation measures are A1 to A5. So I think if we go through those, there are summary sheets, fact sheets 1 and fact sheets 2, so to show how and where these requirements apply in terms of a development category. So the way that it's presented should be accessible and understandable for anyone who needs to engage in this, be they applicants, developers, officers and members. So Joe, I think if we could go to the first one of the mitigation measures. The thermal efficiency requirements are not something that we're going to seek to set new standards for. And the reason for that is because the Future Home Standard and the Future Building Standard, which have been a while in development, are due to be implemented in June this year. And they represent the first significant uplift in building regulations requirements since 2013. There was an amendment in 2016, but that didn't really alter the standard of the building that was built. But what we are consulting on with regard to thermal efficiency is whether or not we should be using or applying a policy that seeks to measure and the performance gap. So the gap between the dwelling that's actually built, how effective and efficient the dwelling is as built compared to how it's designed. And this is designed to make sure that the actual construction of the building conforms to and meets the standards that are being proposed at the design stage. There's a lot of evidence around that suggests that there's quite a significant gap in terms of the performance of the dwelling once it's built compared to how it looked on paper. And Dartmoor have recently just adopted a policy that seeks to measure the performance gap of a dwelling, a building, because this will apply to non-domestic buildings as well. So that's a kind of key consultation question. There are a number of policies out there that we could look to replicate. The UK Green Building Council have got very good guidance on specific policy wording, but it would be taking the policy approach a little bit further, and we would certainly get a degree more of confidence that what we're actually permitting is meeting the standards that developers and applicants are saying they're going to meet. Should we have the next one on that? So that within the new future home standard that will be the building regulations uplift that comes in June 2022, there is a requirement for a roughly equivalent 40% of the building footplate to be translated into a roof-mounted solar PV panels. We are did recognise that commercial roof space probably had the most opportunity in terms of generating solar PV, and certainly helps to alleviate any particular pressure on using greenfield sites for solar PV as well. So there are a number of questions that we've got with regard to that. Jo, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I will do. So where there is solar panels installed, we're asking that all development identifies a suitable space to accommodate a battery for battery storage. We're not going to go as far as actually requiring the battery because the technology is developing so fast. We think it would be probably more efficient and give more scope for that technological innovation to actually just ensure that future homes or future buildings have the space to accommodate a battery in a suitable location. And that's what we're going to be exploring and asking questions around that. I think that's all there is to say about that one. Shall we go to the next slide, please? So this takes account of the government's objective to phase out gas boilers by 2030 or 35. Can't remember quite which one it is. I'm sure someone will correct me. And so therefore we are not going to be supporting gas and oil connections for new development and requiring a air source or ground source heat pumps in all new development. So we're asking a series of questions about whether we should be doing that now, whether that's going too far, whether the developers are aware of delivery issues. I think we hear anecdotally that there are supply chain issues, but our feeling very much is that we should be starting to do this, and actually the supply can be ramped up once the demand is there. We're also going to be looking at whether there are issues that we need to address in terms of Western power distribution and ensuring the sort of phase 3 electricity is enabled to allow for the full heat pump and renewable energy technology. So that's the sort of one of the key tenets, I think, of this proposal, going much further than the building regulations that are going to be brought in June. Can we have the next slide, please? This one looks at passive solar heating and reducing the risk of overheating. So we've got the SPD is pretty comprehensive in this in terms of understanding the kind of measures and the sort of optimizing the orientation for solar gain. But we do also need to be very clear of the sort of relationship with overheating and the changing climate. So we are introducing new protective measures that will be required where the ratio is exceeded, and give some examples of that. What we're interested here is to know whether any other measures should be proposed and what else we could perhaps do, and whether the SPD already goes far enough with that. Can we have the next slide, please? This is a really interesting one, has been raised because of the concerns with roof slates, but what we're really interested in is setting out a hierarchy of acceptability for natural roof slates at the moment, looking at reclaimed UK or European in the first instance, and then going down in order and not accepting effectively Brazilian or Chinese roof slates because of their carbon impact, both over abroad and the shipping it over to us, and also their durability. So we're really interested in whether we should be doing this and ensuring more environmentally friendly, low carbon, local products to be used, and whether actually, as well as roof slates, we could be going further with other products. So really interested in your ideas and the public's view of this and how far we should be going. And also looking at whether a minimum warranty period should be going forward. At the moment, as I say, it's only natural roof slates, but this is the opportunity now through this consultation for us to really explore and work with some of our colleagues, and we already are, of whether we can go further than this. So I think that's it for that one. Phil, you can have the next one if you want.
Thanks, Joe. So the principle of a net gain is an interesting one. But with the current adopted policies within the joint local plan, the way that we apply those is only at kind of single dwelling and above. The principle of net gain is looking to use, so we'd apply this to proposals for things like extensions and change of use, where you wouldn't necessarily require a significant building regs uplift of the whole building as such. But we are looking to use the energy performance certificate, the EPC, that covers the whole dwelling, looking to see if we can achieve a net gain for the whole dwelling. So we're using an extension to leverage whole dwelling gains. Now, it might be that any extension that's built is going to be assessed against current building regs. And so it might be that the provision of that extension in itself is enough to generate a one band uplift on the EPC. But it might be that it's not, and there might be other things that can be done to kind of remedy some of the deficiencies within the existing building that deliver a net gain across the whole dwelling, and you'll achieve broader and more wide-reaching benefits by trying to do that. It's an approach that has been done by other councils previously, not for a little while. But certainly DM colleagues are quite keen to try and find a way of achieving a bit of additionality from householder extensions and the like. And there will be, as I say, more far-reaching benefits for the occupants by securing a better standard of living across the whole dwelling, or indeed the whole building, because this will apply to other buildings as well.
Phil, it's also worth recognising here that the NPPF, so that's the National Planning Policy Framework, in paragraph 8 explicitly already requires us to secure net gains, and the overarching environmental objective now includes specific reference to mitigating and adapting to climate change, including moving to a low carbon economy, and that has been inserted into the National Planning Policy Framework. So I think we're really comfortable that the whole issue of net gain is one that we should be tackling, and this is a sort of a reasonable approach that we can use, and interested to hear what people have got to say about that. Can we have the next slide, Joe?
Shall I take this one?
Yeah, go on, Phil.
So for a long time, I know that certain members have been asking, and DM colleagues have been asking, to what degree we could try to have a policy approach that encouraged adaptation and retrofit of existing buildings over and above the demolition and rebuild, particularly for dwellings of a certain type, often described as trophy dwellings, trophy homes, but not only those types of buildings. The loss of embodied carbon within demolition and rebuild is significant. And it certainly should be something that we should be seeking to dissuade applicants from doing as a default without fully considering all of the options. So this policy requirement it's a little bit technical. It's probably the most technical of the new requirements that we're introducing. I could probably spend 2 hours just talking about this one, but I'll try and summarize it for you for now. We are asking applicants to quantify the net carbon cost of their proposal. So the net embodied carbon, from the demolished structure. Added to that is the embodied carbon within the replacement structure. That gives you an overall embodied carbon figure, and then we are using operational energy as a measure to try and offset that. So whether or not they can reduce the operational energy in the new dwelling above what building regulations requires across a 25-year period to ensure that the carbon cost of the replacement dwelling is offset within 25 years. So there's a number of things there that we need to ask about. Broadly, whether or not the mechanism is the right mechanism that we're seeking to apply. The 25-year threshold is going to be the important one that we need to think about, because for all that we do want people to retrofit existing buildings and extend where necessary, it shouldn't be seen as a policy approach that is absolutely unobtainable. There needs to be a degree of equality and equity around how we're dealing with this. So it shouldn't be massively punitive. There should be some opportunity there for people to actually meet this as a requirement. Equally, it shouldn't be so easy that it doesn't actually form much of a deterrent at all. So there are a number of things that we need to test and understand. Within that, there are a number of embodied carbon assessment tools that we're recommending people have a look at. Because that is it's quite a technical process, and it's not something that is that accessible, because it does require a degree of detail for the figures that are generated to be robust. But hopefully it will secure and achieve the outcomes that the policy has stated that we're trying to achieve. Okay, thank you, Joe. Next one. The EV charging points. This extends and expands upon the existing policy approach that we've got within not just the joint local plan, but the SPD as well. We are increasing the requirement of the number of bays within communal parking areas. We're asking for 50% of those bays to be connected at the point of completion, and the remaining 50% to have service infrastructure for so that they can be retrofit with charging points at a later date without the upheaval of having to dig up all of the surfacing. We are stipulating that we're after a minimum 7k kilowatt charging points for domestic, and we're also stipulating a minimum charging capacity for commercial, albeit we have been asked whether or not 22 kilowatts is appropriate for certain commercial premises. For example, where people aren't there that long, should we be uplifting that to say 50 kilowatts? So there are a number of areas there that we're looking to uplift, and certainly a couple of questions there that we're asking in terms of whether or not we've pitched that in the right way. Okay, next one, please, Joe. So this is kind of aligned to a lot of the things that the joint local plan already asks for, but we're kind of wrapping up a number of different measures under an active and sustainable travel, just to make sure that we've got a kind of coherent and comprehensive understanding of making sure that any development proposals really do optimize the ability to get modal shift towards active and sustainable travel, whether or not there are off-site opportunities that development sites could link with to create a bit of betterment in the local area. As you see, that it is really around major developments, ones that kind of really bring with it the opportunities to add a lot to the local networks and as well as within the sites themselves. The design and access statements there are kind of a key vehicle, pun intended, for how people can recognise and kind of demonstrate that they're meeting the policy requirements that we're looking for. And also there's a kind of key link there with the Plymouth mobility hubs. They're kind of key areas for investment that we're looking to kind of optimise and make the best use of those within Plymouth and the PPA. And then the last one of the mitigation measures. Again, it kind of aligns a little bit with the spatial strategy that we're already applying, but we're looking to ensure that we don't enable a pattern of development that locks in reliance on the car. Apart from anything else, there are a number of kind of social and environmental disbenefits to doing that. The kind of dispersed and sporadic development that is reliant on the car doesn't really matter whether or not the car uses fossil fuels or whether or not it's an EV. The pattern of development in terms of the social impact and environmental impact is quite damaging. There's a sustainability and accessibility matrix that's quite a useful thing to understand in relation to how we're trying to reduce emissions from transport. And I think, as Joe pointed out, when we looked at the AMR figures, road transport is the one area of emissions that has continued to rise, which is certainly contrary to all of the other sectors that we're measuring. And reducing the need to travel is the most important element where we can achieve the most significant benefits. So reducing the need to even do the journey in the first place. And that's where directing development towards kind of named sustainable settlements, where we know that we've got existing services and facilities, would achieve and secure the most benefits for us with regard to this. But obviously there are other things that we need to consider. So this kind of provides a framework for kind of really understanding where those potential impacts are and how we can mitigate for those. Next one, please. Joe, did you want to? Yeah. Thank you.
Shall I wrap this up, give you a break? So in terms of the adaptation requirements, our existing joint local plan and the SPD has a considerable number of policies to address this kind of thing. So what we're trying to do here is just really set them out in a slightly more simplistic way, and asking developers to show exactly how they are going to be protecting soil, protecting trees, and delivering new tree planting to enhance and protect the function of green spaces or greenfield sites. They have multi-functional benefits in terms of often, working for drainage, health and well-being, biodiversity and habitats. So we're looking at asking developers to, in a statement of compliance, and I'll come back to that, exactly how they are going to continue to deliver those benefits. And particularly important is A4, the sustainable drainage and use of permeable surfaces. And we would like, to really encourage good water management and look at how to deliver sustainable drainage as part of the design. So again, asking developers to really tell us what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. Could we have the next slide, please, Joe, because that will just pick up on the next important element of adaptation is biodiversity net gain and habitat improvement. And obviously we do recognise that not only is there a climate emergency, but there's also a biodiversity declaration, I think particularly in South Hams, West Devon as well. And therefore, the biodiversity net gain was already in the joint local plan, and the 10% net gain in major developments is already enshrined in the supplementary planning document. This is well ahead of many other plans, and the Environment Act makes very clear that that is going to be brought into play, and there's some transitionary arrangements going to be in place. So what we're looking for is a supporting the plan and the SPD as part of that, but recognising that new guidance is going to be required. There's a new biodiversity net gain metric 3 out, and we'll be developing separate guidance to be published separately, which links the Devon guidance that's being prepared and the Plymouth guidance which is being prepared. And that's not going to be part of this consultation because we already deal with it, but we do know that it's an evolving area and there'll be further guidance on that. As part of that, there's a real opportunity to use a new tool called the green space factor, which brings together various adaptation measures into a tool that sort of looks at the amount of green and blue spaces within development schemes. We've set out in the consultation how a tool will work potentially, and we're asking a series of questions about it. We're not introducing it at this moment because it's something that perhaps can work really well with biodiversity net gain, particularly on sort of smaller sites or minor development. And we'll want to work with the relevant teams within in all our local authorities to really understand and test how that could work, but very interested in people's views on that. I think that's it for that one. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we've whizzed through in record time all the numerous measures. In terms of how they will be implemented, what we're going to do is ask applicants to complete a statement of compliance, and that will demonstrate how they are meeting those requirements. And if they're not meeting them, they will need to explain why not. We've already got within the joint local plan and the supplementary planning document the provision for contribution to any kind of offsetting scheme. And while we do not want that to be the easy answer, and so the developers get out of doing all these things, it is there as a last resort. And there may be some instances when actually contribution to offsetting scheme authorised by the council and set out by the council may be the best approach. So that's what we're proposing. There's also going to needs to be transition rearrangements, and we need to be really clear that it will only be after it's adopted. It will apply to new applications, and it's not going to be applied now. Although it would be very useful to start get developers to think what might the impact be in their designs, but we don't want to penalise schemes that are already in the system. So it will need to be really carefully thought through in terms of applying to those after adoption. The climate emergency is already an important material consideration, and while, as I said, no weight will be applied now to this document, we do want to, once it is adopted, it will have significant weight in the planning decision-making process. Can we have the next slide, please? Numerous benefits of doing this. I thought it'd be just useful to rehearse them for you. It demonstrates that we are responding rapidly to the crises that exist and the climate and biodiversity emergency declarations that you have declared. It also, importantly, ensures developers that they won't be able to build homes that will be obsolete and need retrofitting. And that's really important because we don't want to be lumbering homeowners with retrofit costs as soon as they move in. It also ensures that buildings are future-proof to deal with the climate change and the climate adaptation measures. We're seeing that, aren't we, this weekend in terms of the change to the climate, and that is going to be really important if we are going to build homes for the future. The other point is about not relying on gas connections and oil connections is the volatility that we've seen in the fuel prices, and actually if we can get air and ground source heat pumps enshrined in particularly affordable homes, then that will bring great benefits for our affordable home owners or occupiers. And as part of that, there's considerable health and wellbeing benefits for all residents. On the flip side of the benefits is the risks. I think Joe did already preempt me in that there are numerous risks to doing this and going this far. We will expect, I think, challenge from developers, and there will be an increased risk of appeals. We are testing the viability to understand what impact that will have, and to make sure that we understand what those increased costs might be, and what does that mean for our different sites. We're undertaking some work to make sure we understand what that could be. We want to know what the impact is on affordable housing providers and their ability to deliver, so we'll be working with registered providers to understand that. There's also potential risks around negotiations of affordable housing and delays to the decision-making process, and there could well be consequences in terms of supply chains of possible slowdown in the delivery of housing. But because we've got a robust 5-year land supply and we're passing the housing delivery test, we think that, and there's a lot of supply in the pipeline which has already got planning permission, to which this would not have any effect, then we think we can it's worth the risk in terms of that. And what we want to achieve is that the developers pass the cost onto the land owner rather than onto purchasers, and we need to be keeping an eye on what that means. And we need to also be very aware of the impact on householders, and that's why we're asking questions around sort of thresholds and whether this should be applied to all development and on the different scales and what that might mean. And we're also very aware of technological advancement, and this is an issue that has been moving forward tremendously quickly, and we won't have all the answers, and in fact this is going to be changing all the time. But I think it's important that it sets us up for the next stage. Can we have the next slide, please? So in terms of what we're doing about those risks, we're testing examples with development management officers. We've talked to all sorts of officers in the council to understand what can we do, how can we be ambitious but also reasonable. We'll need to be doing lots of training, upskilling across the development management teams particularly, and our policy teams to ensure we're implementing it consistently. We want to use the sort of pre-application process to identify those key issues and questions, requirements. And we need to be embedding the climate emergency as a key and first priority in all considerations in the planning decision-making process. We want to work with yourselves to raise awareness of the issues, but also get your involvement and feedback on these kind of measures and what more we could be doing. And that's part of the reason why we really feel it's very important to have a 6-week consultation process to allow us to really identify and explore the issues. This isn't a document that is a done deal at all. It's very much wanting your input and other people's input, and we're working with developers, agents, registered providers and others in going forward. Also, it will be important for us to really explore funding opportunities, bringing forward sites and how we can actually mitigate those any kind of viability issues by perhaps a direct ask to government in terms of bringing forward more difficult sites. Last slide, I think, is on the timescale. So we hope that you'll approve this consultation today at the Partnership Board. We then hope, subject to sort of the processes that are in place, to go out to consultation on the 3rd of March. And then there'll be all sorts of further testing, training, consultation, discussions, engagement processes over the next few months, and development particularly of the web-based tool, so it can be a tool that is useful for developers so that people can see what is required of them in a very easy way. And then we would hope to go to Cabinet, Executive and Hub in June, and then with a view to adopting it as soon after that. So I think that's it from us, and hopefully we've left you enough time for some questions, Judy. We'll close the screen now and go to Judy back for questions. And I think, Paul, you were helpfully going to be sort of summarising the questions that might have appeared in the chat. I haven't been keeping an eye on them, but I'm hoping you have.
Yes, I have. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know that Joseph put his hand up very early on, so let's hear from him first.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, really welcoming all of this work. That's absolutely amazing to see this going on in the background. Really looking forward to having a lot of time over this consultation period to dive in very deeply and kind of utilize the networks that I have access to get as much information and advice into this as possible. As you were going through, I've scribbled a few things down as kind of some comments. Is this a good time to just run through that as briefly as possible?
Yeah, very briefly. Yeah, briefly, please, Joseph, because there are lots of other people.
I won't go into any explanations, but this is I just think it's good to just get these things in as soon as possible. And the first thing being, thinking outside of the box in terms of systems thinking and how easy it is to focus within a department, within a council, within a local authority, and actually from the absolute get-go, accessing the networks of, experts who are available. So I'm thinking immediately of the Devon Donut Collective, thinking of the South Devon Bioregional Learning Centre, who have the expertise to really feed into this stuff. So also building on the comment from Councillor Richard Foss at the beginning in terms of developing onto natural environments, and for me that really also building on that, there's a real one of the fundamental issues that we're facing with development is that it's considered to be natural environment or development. And that has to change. We have to be looking at how we can be developing in a way that is enhancing the natural environment rather than just superseding it. There's things out there, for example, the One Planet Development Policy that looks like that. I know that Phil Baker's in the loop with that one. So things like, solar on buildings, great. Where's the solar going to be manufactured? How can we localize it so that we're actually supporting the local economy and actually creating that locally rather than bringing it in from other places? looking at some extra suggestions in terms of materials, microfabrication, building materials grown from mushrooms that grows exponentially on waste products, hempcrete, recycled plastic building blocks. In terms of habitats, green spaces aren't enough. We need genuinely healthy natural habitats. So looking at wetlands again, which is coming into water management. Using the knowledge available from the experts about water management. There's so much out there that goes beyond just good drainage. Tom Holway mentioned rainwater for toilet flushing. Half of household water use is in toilet flushing. Tanks built into buildings with rainwater collection for that. Active travel, we need to be providing communities with e-bikes, not just giving them charging points. I could go on. I don't want to spend all the time, so I'll leave it there, except I'll just say EPC, things like that. We have to be making sure that there are funding available for people. If we're saying we need to be raising energy efficiency, then we have to be making sure that the poorest people aren't paying for that. So that has to go in alongside that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to diving into this in a lot more depth, but I appreciate that this probably isn't the moment to go anymore. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Joseph. Does anybody, do any officers want to comment on that? I think it was more an instruction than a comment, actually. So keep looking into it all. Thank you, Joseph. Devo, you've got your hand up next.
Yes, thank you very much. I agreed with a great deal of what Joseph just said there, looking into materials and things. There's loads of information out there, and I think this all sounds almost apple pie. If we're not careful, I actually feel very uncomfortable that we in Devon are doing okay, but I wonder at the expense of which other countries. I have a Portuguese friend, and apparently to get the materials for solar panels can have a detrimental effect in areas in Portugal. That is anecdotal. Actually, Joseph, you might have more information than I have, but it's okay saying, oh yeah, we're fitting this, we're ticking our boxes, blah, 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 but at what cost? So I hope that officers do have regard for that. I think also I mentioned at West Devon Borough Council, unfortunately I missed the meeting because of an injury, where in planning, I said must ensure that developers use indigenous plants. It was watered down to should use indigenous plants when there's landscaping in developments. But had I been able to attend the meeting, I think I would have taken that up and emphasised must rather than should. And also, following on from what Joseph was just saying about works, there's lots of works now with recycled concrete when they're demolishing so many buildings. I don't know whether it happened in Plymouth, where now they're doing this research going into crushing all the old concrete and then mixing it with water and carbon dioxide. So I'm hoping that officers will be really keeping an eye on all the technology and as you said, Joanna, the technological advancements. So this is actually, which is good, it's created more questions in my head rather than calmed me down. So thank you very much.
Deepa, we should look forward to your response from the at the consultation stage. If you've asked your question, could you take your hand down if you've finished, please? I think Mark's next on the list.
Thank you, Judy. Can I just say I'm really pleased to see this, and welcome this move. I agree with what a lot of what Joseph has said, and I like the timescale in there as being, we're not dragging this out. It needs to be done as quickly as possible. Got some quick points on M1. One of the things that came to my mind, who will monitor and enforce? M3 energy storage really does need to be heavily on the commercial side. M4 certainly see some challenges there from Western Power about supply issues, substations. M6, I would put the plea in for when you talk about locally sourced materials, the recycling and recovery of stone from excavations, demolitions, walls and reuse either on site or in the area because of local stone. And I think that, this is a really important, here in Salcombe, I've seen tons and tons of stone taken out, which may not be able to be used in the building, but could be used in walls and things like that, which maintains that local distinctiveness. So I think there is an element there that's got to be built on. M8, welcome this move, even if, as been said, it's potentially complex and fraught as well. On your adaptation sides, can I put plea in when you talk A2, protecting and enhancing tree cover, tree protection, new tree planting, extremely important. I think we know part of that has also got to be the ongoing maintenance, but the protection of the existing trees. And can I just say that with that, we will need additional resources. We will need more qualified staff for monitoring. We'll need additional tree officers in, the South Hams and West Devon, and I dare I say in Plymouth as well, to be able to deal with this. And that brings me to the sort of final point is we will see challenges, and I do believe that we're going to need to have increased resources going forward to be able to address this. And this is, in various areas, being, DM staff, monitoring staff, enforcement staff, and specialist staff in those areas. We've got landscape officers, but we're going to need people with experience and the knowledge in biodiversity and areas like that. So no, I welcome this. This is a good move forward. Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Mark. Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I welcome this too. Obviously, it's very good, and I also agree with Mark on the point about the timescale. It's nice and quick and moving forward. I just wanted to make a couple of points. In terms of good example, Joseph raised the thing about water on sites, water retention in the houses. And I think this is a really important point given the flooding issue that we have, because the housing can use a lot of the water that's landing on it without bringing more water onto the site. I think a lot of that is often underestimated. And certainly when you're looking at larger urban developments, it can have quite a significant impact. And we are, constantly seeing the threat of flooding and trying to attenuate it when in fact we can do that per house. The second point I wanted to make was really about this group that I've always reckoned has been missed out by the JLP, and this is the people who are residential vehicles. And I think this is quite significant because potentially these are low carbon impact lifestyles. Somebody seems to be having a bit of background. And I just think it's something that maybe we should be looking at quite sort of carefully at this point, because we haven't provided any of the sites. We've allocated money, but, certainly in South Hams. But I think we are seeing a growing community of people who are kind of not able to afford, even the affordable housing. It's not coming on and supply as quick as we need it. And I think we could start to rethink that a little bit more in terms of what could be a good example of a sustainable low carbon impact lifestyle. We could have some really good sites that would be very positive, rather than at the moment we seem to have a lot of very angry people living in areas where people are living on the roadside, and it's causing division when it could actually be the opposite. And my third point is around the cumulative impact of wildlife. I asked last year whether we were doing any monitoring, and particularly looking at the cumulative impact on some of the mitigation that we've set up, whether it's actually working or not. I think this is really important data. We've heard earlier today about the data that goes back a couple of years and therefore doesn't even show us something that's happened in COVID. We could actually be looking far more at some of the mitigation that's been offered by developments and whether it's really working. I'm not convinced it is, because, for example, in 2019, we saw a crash of the greater horseshoe bats in this area. A lot of people aren't very aware of that. And this is because we're losing wildlife corridors. And I think I would like to see far more strength put into looking after those wildlife corridors, because whatever else about them, they are very important linkages. Thank you.
You're on mute, Councillor Pearce.
Sorry, Phil. I was just saying thank you for those comments, and I hope officers are taking notes furiously of everything that's being said. This is more of a comment session than a question session by the sounds of it. Julian, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, and I've got a couple of questions. One of them is a clarification, really. The first one is that with from that, and I welcome it, is are we saying that all new builds will have to have photovoltaics? Because I mean, just to clarity for my own mind, that's what that's saying. And my question is that in the timetable, it didn't appear as if this was going to come to full councils. And if that is the case, I think that's wrong, and it should definitely come to full council for ratification rather than just executive and hubs and cabinets.
Thanks, Julian. Right. Have we got somebody who can answer the first part of the question, and then somebody who can answer the second part of the question?
Yeah, so first part around PV, yeah, that's a requirement for new builds, and that's not even us asking for that. That's certainly for dwellings. That's written within building regs from June 2022. There is a transitional arrangement within the legislation that means any dwelling that's commenced between 2022 and 2023 there might be a degree of discretion on that, but certainly from any dwelling that's commenced from June 2023 will have to have roof-mounted solar, and we're extending that with this piece of work to cover non-domestic buildings as well.
Okay. Do we have an officer response on the second part? Because if not, I think I can answer it for South Hams, and I presume it's the same for West Devon, but I don't know about Plymouth City Council, I'm afraid. Julian, the scheme of delegation does provide for things like this to go through the executive rather than through full council. But we can certainly have a closer look at that just to double check it. Is Patrick still with us, or has he left now? I think he's probably left, hasn't he? Paul, do you have any answer on this?
Yeah, it'll be the same answer, Chair, that it's delegated to our cabinet. So obviously, Patrick and the cabinet could take a view as to whether they want to refer the matter to full council. But it's the same answer. It can be determined by cabinet.
Thank you. Okay. So, do we have any further questions on this?
Chair, I've been monitoring the.
You've got one or two, haven't you? Yes, come in then, Paul.
Yeah, so just I think Councillor Rose and some of the subsequent contributions from members have picked up a number of the observations that other members were putting in the chat. Councillor Dam raised a couple of points regarding is the statement of compliance actually enforceable, and a wider issue about the issues associated with viability. So Joe did touch on the viability point, that we're going to be looking at that in more detail. Clearly, we don't want to push one policy area at the severe impact on another key area, like the delivery of affordable housing. So we need to pick that up in terms of our viability work, bearing in mind the changes to government policy that are supporting these initiatives. But don't know whether Joe or Phil want to comment on the statement of compliance point.
Yeah, I think our view would be that the statement of compliance would go onto the local validation lists after this. So therefore, we would be able to, it would actually need to be completed to be validated in terms of applications and the process. So I think in terms of that, then yeah, there's some sort of enforceability element. The other point to pick up on Paul's issue on anything that's going to be going into building regs, which actually is quite substantial as part of this, is going to be non-negotiable from a viability point of view. So we do need to be aware of that actually a lot of these things are going to have to be taken as read. And also developers have known about them for the last 2 years. There's been consultations. The government has done an impact assessment in terms of the sort of costs of some of these things, and developers do know about them. Interestingly, on their websites and in their sort of annual reports, they also mention that they are taking them into account when they're buying land. Obviously, that they don't tell us that when they're coming to us for planning applications, but that is what they're saying on their websites.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think I'll just add one thing to Richard, that I think this is going to be more of, from what we've heard, more of a validation process than an actual DM process. So if the application gets registered, it's assumed that they've complied with all the things they've got to comply with. So it shouldn't hold up DM decisions, is what I think I'm trying to say. Joseph.
Thank you. Yeah, as it seems we've got a little bit more time, I'm just going to kind of go into just two things. Well, first of all, I just want to really register like massive concern about the introduction of PV across all roofs and the manufacture of that. I mean, obviously that's a national thing, but I don't think that means that we as Devon need to ignore that. And I think that, you know, looking at local manufacturer options, even if it's more expensive, is something that we should absolutely be doing on, you know, for so many different reasons. And I guess I would like to, yeah, I guess I'd also just like to slightly elaborate on the comment I made very first about, you know, does it have to be nature against development? And, you know, I just think that I think the major flaw with development is that development just is in such a small box. I mean, you know, you look at a town and you just think, my God, how many hundreds of thousands of years of human architecture have we experienced, and we've ended up with this tiny blinkered view of what development has to be. And there are so many incredible, you know, also ancient technologies using, you know, cob and all kinds of natural building materials and very cutting edge building materials, which, you know, you could take a woodland and you could put homes in there that not only have no negative impact to that piece of woodland, but actually enhance it. And you can do that in almost any natural environment. And the fact that we look at development as just box houses on a road together with the wildlife pushed to one side is absolutely crazy. Now, I'm not saying there's a simple way to solve that, but I just think that this is something to be applying our minds to at this time of absolute crisis, both ecologically, socially, environment, you know, the lot. We're in crisis, so we need to be looking at these difficult questions. And I guess if I do have a question, which I sort of made as a comment previously, and the question I have is, you know, how much how are you as a team bringing this topic? And I think you're doing great so far. Everything you said is fantastic. But how are you bringing this to the expertise that is available from different sectors? So not just within kind of your team, but like, you know, what networks, what organizations who network those kinds of experts and collate that kind of expertise? How are you really opening this out to the people who have the specific knowledge that's needed in a document or in a process as complex as this? Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. I think there's some pretty challenging questions there for officers. Well done.
Thanks, Joseph. I guess I would say that we're looking at this from a sort of strategic policy making point of view rather than the minutiae of the implementation. And planning and the joint local plan can only go so far in that. So what we want to set up clearly here is, I think, the policy framework on which we need to then draw in, you're exactly right, all that expertise and opportunity to share knowledge and get knowledge and sort of pass that on to others to say, OK, this is the framework we're setting up for you. How are you going to help us implement it, or how are you going to implement it and pass it over to the developers? Because we don't actually develop the policy, and the plan doesn't develop anything. It just sets that framework. So I think that this is a sort of slightly higher level document, I would say, and setting the context. I mean, I don't think that answers all your questions, and I think you've posed, a proper challenge to us to make sure we are sharing this more widely and asking for a review from all those teams. I know Phil has been talking to various people already, but there is far more we could go and further we could go to.
Thanks for that. Thank you very much. Yeah, just to come back, I would just simply say that I think that the amount of problems that are created when high level decisions are made without that communication happening with the people who are going to be implementing it, I think are untold. I think that so much time and energy, resources and expertise is wasted as a result of the difficulty of your position being where you are. And so I fully accept that, but I also think that this, if ever there is a time to start breaking down the silo walls between sectors and departments and all of that, now is that time. So I appreciate, Phil, I know you've been in all kinds of, I've been aware of you in different places and so on, but I just think, like, you know, let's really change this so that this is implementable, so that we can actually address the crisis that we're in. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joseph. Now, Joe, do you want to wrap up? Because if you do, I'll quickly take Patrick and Paul first.
I was just going to come on that point, Judy, if I may, just
okay, yes, do, Patrick. Yeah, all right, jump in. Yeah.
You know, notwithstanding what Joe said, you know, all members need to be aware that we're seeking to elevate this into the public domain for anybody and everybody to have comment on it. So all those specialists that Joseph alluded to would have an opportunity in the public consultation to bring their expertise to bear. So I think it is important. This isn't a closed shop consultation among sort of those interested in planning policy. It's a broader public consultation. I hope we'll use the period for anybody who is interested and has a part to play to make their views known before we then consider those responses and move forward with any policy position. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Patrick. That's very useful. Paul, you've taken your hand down. Joe, do you want to just wrap up now?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the board if you could formally approve the recommendations in terms of approve this document for consultation, the transition rearrangements that we've set out, and also that the statement of compliance be included in the local validation lists. And secondly, whether you could also approve the authorities monitoring report for publication as well.
I'm happy to do that. Do you want our hands up or anything? Do you want board hands up?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Happy to do that. Who else have we got? We've got Hilary somewhere, haven't we?
Hilary's there.
Hilary's there. Good. And Lynn's there.
Apologies from Councillor Pengelly today, Judy.
Yes, I know. Yes. Okay. Fine. Thank you. Well, I think you've got what you need now, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Do you want the board members to come back on a fresh invite, or do you want us just to stay online?
Come back and just fresh invite.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. There will be notes coming out, and if you've got any further questions, please email either Joe or Phil, and they will send responses out as part of the notes from the meeting. But thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.